Bonjour. So if it's okay, I'll stick with English. You'll thank me for that. I'm here today to tell you about something very important. As important as anything that I've talked about in my 35 years of writing books about the digital age. Because once again, the technology genie has been released from the bottle. And this genie is being summoned by an unknown person or persons named Satoshi Nakamoto. And this genie is now at our disposal to give us another kick at the can to rewrite the economic order and the social power grid. Let me explain. By the way, on Twitter, I'm at Tapscott if you're tweeting away. There are huge changes that are underway in the world, and I think that if we do this right, we can rethink many of our institutions to create a more sustainable, just, and fair world. To begin, there's a technology revolution that's underway. Now, you're familiar with all these technologies: mobility, the social web, the Internet of Things, cloud, drones, robotics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data. I've become convinced that the most important technology taking us forward for the next 2 to 3 decades is none of these. And you would be surprised to hear me say it's the underlying technology of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, and it's called the blockchain. Blockchain. It's not the most sonorous word in the world. I remember 25 years ago, I would explain the World Wide Web, and it just rolled off your tongue. Today we have the blockchain. It is what it is. But this technology will enable very profound changes if we will it. Let me explain. For the past 40 years, and I've been around talking about this stuff for most of that time, we've had the Internet of Information, and it's been great. If I send you some information, I'm actually not sending you the information, I'm sending you a copy. Whether that's a PDF or a Word document or a spreadsheet or an email, or even with the web was a platform for the presentation and publishing of content. The first era of the Internet gave us all a printing press where we could copy information, and that was great. But copying things is not great when it comes to assets. Assets like money, or music, or art, or all kinds of financial assets like stocks and bonds and swaps and so on. Loyalty points. Things like energy, carbon credits. All of these are assets that belong to somebody that may have some kind of commercial value. And you saw with the Internet of Information, we did copy some of these. We copied music, and that pretty much destroyed the lives of many, many musicians. Copying assets is not a good idea. If I give you 100 euros right now, it's really important that you have the money and I no longer have the money, and that I can't give that same 100 euros to you. This is called the double spend problem, and it's been a big problem with cryptographers for a very long time. Now, the basic problem here is a cartoon from 1993. These two dogs are talking, deux chiens. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Well, that problem still exists today when it comes to assets. Establishing who a person is 100% and managing all the business and transaction logic of doing commerce is not possible in a peer-to-peer way. So the way that we handle that is through middlemen. We have powerful intermediaries like banks and credit card companies, and we have big technology companies like Apple to manage music. And we have governments to establish our identity and to give us social insurance money and so on. And overall, these big intermediaries do a pretty good job. But there are a bunch of problems that are becoming bigger and bigger all the time. First of all, they're all centralized. And you know any central server can be hacked. And anybody from Home Depot or a customer of Home Depot or Target or an employee of the CIA or anyone who lives south of 49th Street in Manhattan knows what happens when centralized things go down. The Con Ed power grid went down and they were in the dark for 10 days. So centralization is a problem. But also, these middlemen exclude 2.5 billion people from the global economy who don't have enough money to have a bank account. They slow things down. You know, it's cheaper and faster to send an anvil by FedEx to China than it is to send money. And they tax things. You know, people who are part of the global diaspora who send remittances home to their ancestral lands may be taxed by Western Union, other companies, 8%, 10%, 14%. The biggest problem is that these powerful intermediaries have captured the most important asset of the digital age, which is data. Data has become a new asset class, and it may exceed previous asset classes in value. Agrarian land under the agrarian economy, industrial plants in the industrial age. It's a strange thing. All of us create this data, the greatest asset ever, but it's owned by a tiny handful of companies and intermediaries. So overall, the benefits of the digital age have been asymmetrical. And this is a very hard thing for someone like me to say, because I've been a big champion of the digital revolution for decades. And I argued that the new media is different. Unlike the old media, broadcast, radio, print, and so on, it was centralized, it was one way, it was one to many, controlled by powerful forces. Everyone out there was a passive and inert recipient. I said, the new media is distributed. It's decentralized. It's one-to-one and many-to-many. It's not controlled by powerful forces. As such, it has an awesome neutrality. It can enable us to build a more democratized peer-to-peer world. Well, if you look at the data, that did not happen. The 51st percentile individual or family is declining for the first time ever in history, in modern history. Social inequality has become the biggest public policy issue brought to us by a French radical named Thomas Piketty. And we have a big problem. We have wealth creation, but we have declining prosperity. What if there were a distributed platform, a new internet of value that enabled us to exchange and store and protect assets in a peer-to-peer way without powerful intermediaries? That would be an incredible thing. Well, in 2008, right after the crash, before the crash, actually, the financial services industry, somewhat propitiously, an unknown person or persons named Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a paper describing the Bitcoin protocol. And that paper has set off a wildfire that's extended throughout the venture capital community, now into financial services, into government, corporations, regulators, academics, and everybody is buzzing about this. Now, don't be confused by the bad press around Bitcoin. See, Bitcoin is many things. In the smallest way, it's an asset, okay? It goes up or down in value. Should you buy it? Should you sell it? Not of interest unless you're a speculator. More broadly, Bitcoin is a digital currency. It's not a fiat currency created by nation states. It's a cryptocurrency. And that's more interesting, especially if you live in Argentina, for example, where there's big currency fluctuation or where there are restrictions on capital flow and you can't get your money out of the country, for example. It's sure of interest to those diaspora that are paying 12% to send their money back home. But the most important thing is neither of those. The most important thing is the underlying technology of cryptocurrencies. It's called the blockchain. And to me, this is the biggest innovation in computer science in a generation. And it has profound implications for every organization. You see, because trust is established not through powerful intermediaries, but through clever code and through mass collaboration. For the first time, we have a native digital medium for value. And for the first time in history, people around the world can conduct transactions and do all kinds of things without a powerful intermediary that captures the value. So let me just explain for a second how this works. First of all, if I do a transaction, I send some money, or it could be any transaction. I vote, I get married, I sell a house, I trade a stock, it's called the stock market, or that light buys power from a power source and pays for the power. Any transaction goes on to a network, and I'll describe the Bitcoin network here, although there are others. And it's broadcast out to thousands of computers. And then there's a group called miners. This is like gold miners, not young people. And they get to work using powerful computing resources to authenticate all of these transactions. And they have big computing power, estimated to be 5 to 20 times bigger than all of Google. And every 10 minutes, just like a heartbeat of a network, a block gets established. And the first miners to find the truth, to authenticate these transactions, are paid some of the digital currency of that blockchain, say Bitcoin. And then that block is connected to all of the previous blocks, why it's called a blockchain, and everything is time-stamped. So if I wanted to go and hack that block and pay that 100 euros again to somebody else, I'd have to hack a block using the highest level of encryption, not just on a centralized server, but across thousands and thousands of computers all around the world, ultimately millions and maybe billions of computers, within a very short period of time, in the light of the most powerful computing resource in the world, and not just for that block, but because it's connected to the previous blocks, I'd have to hack the entire chain. Now, I won't say that anything is unhackable, but this is infinitely more secure than the computing systems that we have today. Now, the Bitcoin blockchain is just one of a whole number of blockchains. Who's heard of Ethereum? Hands, please? Okay, this is fantastic. So, Ethereum is a blockchain that has all kinds of extra capabilities on it for application development, for the rapid creation of smart contracts that manage digital assets. And Ethereum, I was speaking at the Ethereum Developers Conference in London. It was a big room like this, about the same number of people, but all along the edge, people were sitting down, 6 deep, developers. And in that room were people creating an alternative to the stock market, an alternative to Uber, an alternative to our current system of democracy. There were people creating a new model for the banking, for the payment system. It's an extraordinary thing. Now, most people think about blockchains in terms of financial services. And to be sure, there are some big opportunities. Do you ever hear the expression, a Rube Goldberg machine? Or if you Google that, Rube Goldberg is this guy who created all these complex machines that would do all these things, and at the end, it would crack an egg, or it would shut a door, or something like that. That's the financial services industry. I tap my card on Starbucks, and a bit stream goes through all of these systems, some of them being 1970s mainframes, and at the end, a transaction occurs 3 days later. Well, banks are now struggling to understand what this technology means. Because what do banks do? Well, in the book, we describe these things. They authenticate and attest to value. They say this money exists here. They transfer it. They store it. Because they store it, they get to lend it. They get to exchange it. They get to fund and invest value. It's called investment banking. They get to insure value, manage risk, and they get to account for and audit value. Well, that's their role as an intermediary in the financial services industry. If you have a distributed trust protocol, in theory, the banks are not required to do anything. Now, banks are not going to go away, not in my lifetime, but all of the banks are struggling with what does this mean? At minimum, if they embrace this technology, it could save tens of billions of dollars. It could speed up the metabolism of the whole banking system. Imagine you tap your card in Starbucks, there's no 3-day settlement. The settlement is instant because it's just a change in a database. So Ben Losky is the CEO of Financial Services for the state of New York. He sued the banks for $15 billion, most powerful financial regulator in the world. He started getting into Bitcoin, and he discovered the power of this thing. He quit his job, set up his own advisory firm, and in the book, Blockchain Revolution, we quote him as saying, this is Ben Losky, in 5 to 10 years, the financial services industry will be unrecognizable, and I want to be part of that change. So everybody's on board now. The Economist did a cover story called The Trust Machine, the great chain of being sure about things. And they compared blockchains to 2 other developments. One was the creation of double entry accounting, and the other was the creation of the corporation. Now, they're kind of boring things, but those were the 2 foundations of our economic system today. And for the economists, that's how big this is. By the way, you have triple entry accounting. Credit, debit, automatic entry goes into a blockchain. Oops, what do you need an audit for? You have a real-time, time-stamped record of everything that's occurred. Even Dilbert's involved now. I think we should build a blockchain. Uh-oh. Does he understand what he said, or is it something he saw in a trade magazine ad? So Dilbert says, what color do you want your blockchain? And the manager says, I think mauve has the most RAM. So when Dilbert gets involved, you know, something weird is going on. So the book has been out for 3 weeks. Damn you, Harry Potter. It's also in Canada. It's competing with an adult coloring book. Do you know about these things? I didn't even know they existed. Adult coloring books. Best-selling book. Beating the blockchain. Anyway, it's a sign of the times that a book with the word blockchain in the title can compete with Harry Potter. So, that's a technology driver for change. Now let me talk about some of the other big contextual drivers, and we'll discuss what might this mean for your business. Secondly, there's a demographic driver. We have the first generation to come of age in the digital age, and these are kids. I started studying kids in 1997 when I noticed how my own children were able to use all this sophisticated technology. And at first I thought, my children are geniuses, they're prodigies. But then I noticed that all their friends were like them, so that was a bad theory. So I started working with 300 kids and I wrote this book. A decade later, I wrote the sequel. And I came to the conclusion that there's no more powerful force to change every institution than the first generation of digital natives. I'm a digital immigrant. I had to learn the language. This is, globally, it's a huge generation. Not so big in France. Who has children under the age of 33? Hands, please. Oh, that's pretty good. Yeah, I did that in Italy recently, and about 10 hands went up in a room of 1,000 people, and I almost canceled my talk. And I was like, everybody, just go home, light a candle, get a bottle of wine, have some music, make some babies. But this is a huge generation, biggest generation ever. And what makes them a real force for change is the first generation to come of age in the digital age. And you see this cartoon? It didn't get a single laugh in the room. This is from 1997 in Growing Up Digital, from my book back then. When I put this cartoon on the screen back then, people would fall off their chair. They'd be laughing so hard, Oh, a baby using a computer. That's crazy, man. Now everybody looks at it as like, why doesn't the kid have an iPad or something? What is that weird thing there? Or why doesn't the kid have an iPotty? So this time around, the first generation of the internet, do you remember, anyone here remember using Mosaic? And we all had dial-up, right? And it took like a minute for a screen. Now we've got broadband, we have mobility, we've got all kinds of infrastructure that's applicable to this blockchain revolution, and we have a new generation of digital natives for whom it's like the air. So what does this do to the structure and the nature of the corporation? Well, there was a famous Nobel Prize-winning economist named Ronald Coase, and he died just 3 years ago. And 80 years ago, he wrote a paper where he asked a deceptively simple question. He said, why does the firm exist? He said, if Adam Smith is right, the open market's the best mechanism for allocating people and money and resources in a society, why isn't everybody an independent contractor at every step along the way in production? Why do we have firms? Is Riel Miller in the audience by any chance? Oh, there he is. So I got to thank Riel for this, because 25 years ago, I said, who's going to be the most important economist to help us understand the internet? And he said, Ronald Coase. And I said, who is Ronald Coase? So I've been talking about Ronald Coase for 25 years. What happened is that throughout the industrial age, the costs of transactions in an open market were greater than the cost of doing things inside the boundaries of a corporation. So we created vertically integrated firms. Now, Coase talked about 4 kinds of transaction costs. He talked about the costs of search, of finding all the right information and people and assets in an open market. It'd be prohibitive. So we bring them inside the boundaries of the firm, where we have filing cabinets to find information, org charts to find people, and so on. Secondly, the cost of contracting. If every little activity in the economy required a contract, this would be prohibitive. Bring it inside the boundaries of a firm where you don't need contracts. Thirdly, the cost of coordination. Imagine trying to get a whole bunch of people who'd never met together to create an automobile. The coordination cost would be too great, so we bring that inside the boundaries of a firm where we have management. And fourth, the cost of establishing trust in an open market. Prohibitive. Bring it inside the boundaries of a firm. Blockchains will decimate each of these 4 classes of transaction costs. Search. Imagine being able to find the truth. Contracting. Smart contracts on a blockchain. It's just like what they sound like, contracts that have managed digital assets and that have a bank account. Thirdly, the costs of coordination, huge. And fourth, we now have a platform for establishing trust in an open market. So we're moving from an extended enterprise to business webs to something very, very different. Now, I'm just going to tell you a quick story. This is a pre-blockchain story to make the point. This guy on the screen here, his name is Rob McEwen. The reason I know this story is he moved across the street from me. He's my neighbor. And he holds a cocktail party to meet the neighbors. And he says, "You're Don Tapscott. I've read some of your books." I said, "Great. What do you do?" And he says, "Well, I used to be a banker, and now I'm a gold miner." He's a funny guy, too. He introduces his wife to the group. And he says, "I'm a gold miner. This is my wife. She's a gold digger." Thankfully, she is not. And she has a sense of humor. Anyway, he tells this amazing story. He takes over this gold mine. His geologist can't tell him where the gold is. So he gives him more money to get more data, millions of dollars. They come back. They can't tell him where to go into production. He gives them more money. This goes on and on. After a few years, he's ready to give up. But he has an epiphany one day. He wonders, if my geologists don't know where the gold is, maybe somebody else does. So he does a radical thing. He takes his geological data, he publishes it, and he holds a contest on the internet called the Goldcorp Challenge. It's basically $500,000 in prize money for anyone who can tell me, do I have any gold? And if so, where is it? He gets 77 submissions. They come from all around the world. They use techniques that he's never heard of. And for his $500,000 in prize money, my friend Rob McEwen finds $3.4 billion worth of gold. The market value of his company goes from $90 million to $10 billion overnight. And I can tell you, because he's my neighbor, he's a happy camper. What did he do? Well, we think that talent is inside our boundaries, right? Your most precious asset goes out the elevator every night. We have these expressions. No, the uniquely qualified minds to solve Rob McEwen's biggest problems were outside his boundaries. Now, this was pre-blockchain, but Rob McEwen today is hugely into blockchain technology. And he says, just imagine what I could do with this platform compared to what we had before. So in the book, we describe something called a distributed autonomous organization. And we said, how far could this go? The distributed autonomous organization, we said, would have no people. It would just be autonomous agents working on a blockchain with smart contracts. You could have a crowdfunding campaign to create this organization, but it would have no managers, no CEO, and no staff. It would go about its work creating value. So Alex, my son, that's my co-author, we thought, should we really put this in the book? I mean, it's a really crazy idea. We said, no, we're going to put it in the book. The day the book came out, an organization was created called the Distributed Autonomous Organization with a crowdfunding campaign. It has no CEO, no management, no people. It's a blockchain set of smart agents and smart contracts. And its first job was to go and raise some money. In 2 weeks, it raised $134 million US, but it has no people. You know that song, Bob Dylan? There's something going on here and you don't know what it is. Get ready for profound changes in the deep structure and architecture of the firm. Changes in how we orchestrate capability in society to innovate, to create goods and services. So here it is. Complexity from low to high, and automation from low to high on the bottom. So the upper left quadrant is your company. This is Renault on a blockchain. The lower left quadrant is smart contracts. And these exist today. Ethereum is a great platform. Autonomous agents, in the lower right, and distributed autonomous enterprises. And here it is. This is an actual screenshot from 2 days ago. The Distributed Autonomous Organization has $132 million, and its goal is to invest in blockchain companies. Now, if you're an investment banker, you might be interested in the fee structure. Rather than 2 and 20, it was 0 and 0. So it's not just investment banking, of course, that will be impacted by this. Okay, so the final big change is the social revolution. Think about the world today. We are too conflicted, and we do have many, many problems. So this is not a political story. It's a story about self-organization and how that can be a new force. 8 years ago, I got an email from a friend, and they said, do you know this guy? His name is Obama. He's trying to become the president. He thinks your book, Wickonomics, is the key to winning the presidency and transforming America. Go to myBarackObama.com. So I go there, and there's my book right on the screen. It's like we believe in the principles of Wickonomics and use the internet in every way possible. Saying, I'm asking you to believe not just in my ability to bring about real change in Washington, I'm asking you to believe in yours. And I looked at this thing. Well, my first reaction was, I am the man. Clearly. But not so fast, because it turns out I'm not the man, because there was a Wickonomics community. There was also a young firefighters for Obama community. There was a single moms for daycare for Obama community. He created a platform upon which 35,000 communities self-organized, and that's what brought him to power. So we are seeing radical new platforms emerge within our society for people to self-organize and to bring about change. So you put those four together, and I think you end up with a burning platform. Do you know the idea of a burning platform? That you're, I don't know, commandite burning platform. You're somewhere where the costs of staying where you are become greater than the costs of going to something new, even though the new state is not fully known. We have a burning platform in society. So let me close by talking about, I'm going to spend a minute or two on each. These are 10 business models that are radical, each of which I think blockchains will disrupt. So let's go through them. The first is a new species of business I call digital conglomerates. What business is Google in? Well, Google's largely an advertising agency. They sell ads. But Google is also a media company and a hardware company. It's the second largest maker of servers in the United States. It has one customer itself. It has mobile devices. It's a bank. It has a payment system. Google is likely to emerge as one of the leading automobile companies because it has one of the best technologies for autonomous vehicles. Well, what happens to Google on a blockchain? Well, let me give you an example. You think about the financial services part of that. Annalie Domingo is a housekeeper who lives in Toronto. And every month, she gets on the bus and she takes her check to the bank. Then she gets on the bus again and she goes to the Western Union office where she sends her remittances to her mother in Manila, in the Philippines. Remittances are the biggest flow of capital from the developed world to the developing world. bigger than direct foreign investment and bigger than foreign aid. $600 billion a year. Anna Lee gets charged 11%. The money takes 4 to 7 days to get there. Her mother never knows when it gets there. Well, now, Anna Lee Domingo, as of 6 months ago, goes onto her mobile device, onto Abra, and she types in $500, whatever. She sends the money to her mother. The money moves at the speed of light. Within 10 minutes, a block gets created. And then Annalee's mom looks at her mobile device, and there are a number of Abra tellers. These are people that are part of the Abra community. And they're driving around in her neighborhood, kind of like Uber. And she sees one, he's 6 minutes away. He's a 5-star teller. She goes, boom. This woman shows up and gives her $500 worth of Filipino pesos in cash. The whole thing took a few minutes, not 4 to 7 days, and Anna Lee Domingo pays 1.25% rather than over 10%. So the disruptors are about to get disrupted. Secondly, we have a business model I call data frackers. Do you know fracking? Is that a word in French? Fracking? No. Fracking is an oil and gas term that you drive steam into the ground and it pushes out oil and gas, mainly. Well, we have data frackers today that they use technology to drive all this data out of the internet. So here's one called Data Miner that views everyone on Twitter as a sensor. And it notices something's going on. 1, 2, 3, 4, pattern detected. There's been an explosion somewhere. And Data Miner then sends us information to its subscribers that include the security forces, but also CNN. CNN shows up. Sure enough, there's been an explosion there. They're fracking the whole social world to find data. Now, of course, the ultimate data fracker is Facebook. How could blockchains disrupt this? Well, right now, all of our data is owned by these companies, and it's owned by banks, and it's owned by governments that are creating a surveillance society. And people who say, privacy is dead, get over it. This is foolish. Privacy is the foundation of a free society, and your identity needs to be managed responsibly. The trouble is, all of us are losing our digital identity to these powerful companies. What if, on a blockchain, you could create the virtual you? Sorry, what's your first name? Pierre. The virtual Pierre. And the virtual Pierre is owned by Pierre. See, right now, Pierre is leaving a trail of digital crumbs as he goes through life, and the virtual Pierre knows more about him than he knows because he can't remember what he bought a year ago or what he said a year ago or his exact location a year ago. Well, the virtual Pierre could be owned by Pierre, and it would go out there and it would only give a shred of information required to do a transaction. A lot of transactions, you don't even have to know who the other party is. If you sell me something, what's important is that you get paid, not that you know who I am. So the virtual Pierre collects all this data and captures the most valuable asset of the digital age. Then we have these companies that are part of the so-called sharing economy. You know this term? Uber, Lyft, TaskRabbit, Airbnb. But these are not sharing economy companies. This is silly. They're aggregators of services. Uber is a $65 billion service aggregator. There's no sharing. I get my research about sharing from 4-year-olds. If you ask a preschooler, if I give you one of my cookies, is that sharing? And the kid will say, Yeah, that's sharing. Then you say, if I give you one of my cookies, but you have to give me a pen, is that sharing? And the kid will say, no, that's mean. These are not sharing economy companies. Well, what if Uber became Super Uber? What if it became Suber, as we call it in the book, a distributed application on a blockchain? It would look exactly like Uber today, only autonomous agents and smart contracts would do all the function. And that $65 billion of value would go to the drivers or to the people who own a little room, as in the case of Airbnb. Peer production, of course, will be supercharged by this technology. Now, Linux, peer produce, the Internet of Information enabled us to create some extraordinary peer-produced capabilities. But many of them are limited. Wikipedia, for example, is stalled today. Many people say that. Could we build a reputation system on a blockchain if Wikipedia were to exploit this technology, whereby I might be motivated to go there and to create great content because my reputation would be a rich set of information that would be part of the virtual me, part of my identity. And that reputation could then be portable when I apply for a job or when I do other things. Could we even build a compensation system into this so people who do extraordinary work on Wikipedia might get paid? Number 5, ideagoras. Now, this is a term that I came up with like over 20 years ago in the digital economy, but ideagoras can now be supercharged as well. So 60% of all of these are open markets for uniquely qualified minds. So 60% of Procter & Gamble's revenue comes from outside the company. So what's the next step? Things like Inno360 that's exploring blockchain technology to be able to find the uniquely qualified minds based on all of these virtual identities that are floating around. Again, dropping transaction costs. Prosumers, turning your consumers into producers. Now, this is another term for the digital economy, although the concept actually came from Alvin Toffler in a book called The Third Wave in the late 1970s, unbelievably. But today, we think customers are outside our boundaries. Well, as we move towards distributed trust, could we start to view customers inside our boundaries in the sense of they're inside our business ecosystem? So, companies are doing this already. Threadless is a clothing company where its customers design its products. It's an enormously profitable company. Even today, you can get your customers to create your advertising for you, prosumers. Have you seen the Doritos crash the Super Bowl contest? No. Okay, Doritos said to its customer, you know Doritos, the chips, said to its customers, you create our advertising and the best ads, we'll run them on the Super Bowl, which after the World Cup is the most watched television show in the world. So I'm going to show you a couple of them. This ad right now, 30-second ad, was created by a couple of young women who were nobodies, but now they're somebodies because their ad ran on the Super Bowl.
Paper or plastic? Paper's fine. I like these.
We need more volume.
Old school. Fiery habanero? Yeah, those are hot. Oh, salsa verde. Oh, blazing buffalo and ranch? Giddy up! Gonna need a cleanup on register 6.
Ew. Ew. So some of the ads were a little edgy, as you can imagine. Many of them involved people smoking a plant substance. But this ad is one of the more edgy ones. It actually got on to the Super Bowl, and it's one of my favorites. I mean, what advertising agency is going to dress someone up in a mouse suit and have them beat up your customer? But for the Doritos demographic, apparently that's a big thing. So the whole world of prosumers, again, will be supercharged by blockchains. We have 3D printing, and where everything in a supply chain essentially becomes an entry on a distributed ledger. Then we have rights monetizers. There are so many parts of our economy today where people create value, but they don't get to capture the value. The music industry being Exhibit A. Do you know that if you were a songwriter 20 years ago and you wrote a hit song that sold 1 million copies, you would make 45,000 US dollars. Today, if you're a songwriter and you write a hit song that has 1 million downloads on Spotify, you don't get $45,000, you get $36. It's not enough to get to the airport. So the big labels control the music industry, and the Internet of Information made it worse because people published assets. Then along came Apple and the streaming companies like Spotify that took more of the value. The musicians have crumbs. So the Grammy-winning singer-songwriter Imogen Heap is one of the people building a new platform for the music industry. And when you're a musician, you post your music, and the music is surrounded by software that has a set of smart contracts and that has a bank account and some autonomous agents. The music, the song, becomes a business. You post your song on a blockchain, and if you want to listen to it, it's a few microcents. You want to put it in a movie, that's different. And the smart contract specifies all of the IP rights and ensures that the artist gets fed first, not at the end of the food chain. It's called mycelium music. There's others called ujo.com. Number 8, platforms for participation. Well, this all started with Amazon, and we've seen all kinds of platforms where people self-organize on the platform. We'll get ready for a whole new wave of platforms that will be so important for the enterprise. And right now, Microsoft is partnered with Ethereum and with a number of other companies to build blockchain platforms for the enterprise. And those of you who are IT executives, we're going to move our technology onto blockchains over the next period. We have the global plant floor. Pre-blockchain, the Chinese motorcycle industry is dozens of little companies that all cooperate together to create a motorcycle. But there's no Harley Davidson. There's no Yamaha. There's no OEM pulling all the strings. They meet on the internet and in tea houses. This is now 45% of global motorcycle production. And get ready for the 1,000-euro car from China, too. And there's so much interest in China. Both Alex and I are off to China for a month in the fall. And we're speaking all over the place. Everyone there is trying to understand blockchains and what they could do. And the final one is what I call the wiki workplace, moving beyond electronic mail to create these new collaborative platforms. Imagine a collaborative platform within the enterprise where your personal avatar and your identity was at the core, collecting information, making you more productive, protecting your privacy, ensuring that the corporation has appropriate information as opposed to that information being captured by powerful technology companies outside. So, the disruptors are about to get disrupted. What a time to be in business, and what a time to be alive. This is a new paradigm. And when you have a new paradigm, these things cause dislocation, conflict, coolness. They're often received with hostility. Vested interests fight against change, and leaders of old paradigms have great difficulty embracing the new. How will your company find leadership for change. Well, those who don't change will be left behind, just as with the Internet of Information more than 20 years ago. On the other hand, it's a time for each of us to become curious. Get a Bitcoin wallet, download it onto your mobile device. I can talk to you about public key encryption all day, but if you just download some Bitcoin and make a payment, you'll understand it instantly. The other thing you can do, well, get yourself educated. Buy my book in massive volume. Christmas is coming soon. I know you have friends. No, seriously. Start a pilot. And those of you who are IT executives, start to think about architecture, because this has huge implications. Let me close with this thought. Alex and I have been spending some time studying nature, trying to figure out what would a trust protocol mean for humans and society. And it turns out these things exist in other species. Birds, fish come in schools, bees come in swarms. Starlings over the moors of England come in something called a murmuration. Have you heard that word? Murmuration. It refers to the murmuring of the wings of the birds. And starlings are out over a 20-mile radius throughout the day, foraging for food. At night, they create one of the most spectacular things in all of nature. The murmuration has a function. Look up here. That's a predator, a hawk, a fierce predator being chased away by the collective power of the little birds. Scientists that have studied this say they've never seen an accident. There's leadership, but there's no one leader. This is a trust protocol in action. Now, is this some kind of fanciful analogy, or might we learn something? This thing functions according to the principles of the blockchain. It's a big collaboration. There's an openness. Blockchains are an open source platform. There's a sharing of all kinds of information. Food sources, trajectory, danger. There are rules, the big one being don't bump into anybody else. But another one is don't get too far away. But there's also a great sense of interdependence and collective self-interest. Remember I said trust is achieved not through powerful intermediaries, but through a sense of collective self-interest that's built into the code. And it has a great integrity. Integrity being, which is, in business, it's the expectation that another party will be honest, considerate of your interests, and abide by their commitments. And with this new platform, you must abide by your commitments or you can't participate. You cannot be dishonest, not in terms of executing transactions. If you're a dictator in Honduras, you can't steal land from people if that land is posted on the blockchain, as has been happening. So this is a platform, I think, that it doesn't require us to build a great new society, but it might enable us to. It might enable us to reinvent not just financial services of the corporation, but to change government, democracy. Imagine elected officials coming to power with a smart contract that government funds don't allocate unless they do what the citizens want, not what their powerful funders want. I look at this thing and I get a lot of hope that maybe this second generation will bring a smaller world, but a world that's a better one. And that this age of networks intelligence might be an age where the promise is fulfilled, finally, and where the peril is unrequited. Thank you very much.